issue was,
Yep.
should the county take them out? I think if the county will run it like a regular campground, rather than host or something, get rid of the ladies.
How were the roads coming from Helena this morning?
Patrol, I think it's still.
Not bad.
Not too bad?
It was a little bit bad at McMaster's, but the closer you get to town, it's better.
Well, I seen a lot of snow on cars coming from that way, and I was wondering, so. Okay,
It's not bad.
not too bad, all right. We were worried about you guys.
So we return back to our meeting for the 10:30 Jerry Busey Broadwater County 2020 census.
Oh, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jerry Busey. I know many of you pretty well. I'm a Broadwater County graduate and born and raised here. Right now, I am took a sabbatical from my career to do a 2-year stint with the U.S. Census Bureau to prepare all of Montana for the 2020 census count. A couple of things that are really significant about the 2020 census and a little different than where we have been. First of all, that the census, the decennial census as it's called, is where they do the population count of everybody residing in the whole country. So in Montana, that's also how they distribute back federal funds that you pay in as taxes, come back to Montana to a variety of programs. That is how they determine how much of the federal funding we get, is by that population count. So an estimate of the George Washington University study shows that in Montana, for every person that is counted in the census, it is the equivalent of about $2,000 per person per year. So every single man, woman, and child in the state of Montana is worth about $20,000 over that 10-year period. And that's transportation, all kinds of medical programs. That statistic uses about 30 of the highest dollar amount of federal funding for programs. So the money is probably the most important aspect of why it's important to count everyone. The second aspect of the census is that that's how we do apportionment. All the way from your voting precinct, school districts, all the way up to our congressional districts is determined by that population count. And it's a very complex figure because in the U.S. House of Representatives, there is a certain number that there can be. So it's like how every other state does in terms of growth and population, but we are really one of those states that's on the cusp of looking at getting a second congressional seat back, which would make us the first state in the union to ever gain one back after it's been lost. So that's kind of an interesting piece of history there. And so there's funding, voting, power, that whole thing. And then it's also about just the data that the census gathers is so important for economic development, infrastructure. That's also where you get the data that determines the size of your community, that qualifies you for different kinds of federal grants and programs for infrastructure development. So with those three things in mind, the 2020 census is going to be a really big deal for Montana. So I have been working for about 18 months now, going county to county, community to community, and also working really closely with a statewide committee that's been set up and helping communities plan for the 2020 census. Largely that's about kind of coming together with sort of representation from all the facets of your community and identifying who in the community is going to be less likely to respond to the census, and really come up with some plans and information to make sure that they participate. So largely from all of the research that we've done, the hardest to count populations are And there are several of them that I know are in this community. Number one, I think, is children under 5. In today's day, just a different kind of social environment, there tends to be, like, kids are maybe part-time with mom, part-time with dad, both think they counted them, nobody counts them. Or they're staying with grandparents temporarily, so they just end up, there's no statistical way to really match up kids under 5 because they're not in school, so there's not those administrative records that show where they are. So that's there's huge capacity for an undercount with children under 5. We also see a lot of seniors that aren't living like in a nursing home type facility. That can be another area that seniors can be missed. Really rural environments can easily be missed because I know you guys have a really great planning department that's worked hard with the state, so I think the address list is really good there. But often if there's rural addresses that don't get mail delivered right to the house, that can be an easy miss. Any folks that don't speak English as a first language, that can be a big barrier to participating in the census. And as we all know, across Montana, just some anti-federal government feelings really impede the taking of the census. So those are kind of the top categories, I think, as it relates to Broadwater County. So I am here today to just answer questions, kind of lay out the timeline for how things are progressing with the census, and see if you might be interested in pulling together like a loose community delegation to identify some of those hard to reach populations and what things or tools or resources we might be able to provide to help get the word out.
So, Jerry, I remember from our MACO meetings that is going to be available to maybe do this online. Is that correct?
Yes, for the first time ever, you will have the ability to fill out the census via smartphone, internet. We also are having like a calling center program, so you can actually use just a regular voice phone and take it that way. And then, of course, it will still be available by the regular form as it has always been. There's a couple of different ways that you will be able to participate in the census, and it will first, if you have your mail delivered directly to your home, you will get a postcard, and it's available to start taking like March 9th of 2020. So you'll get a postcard that says it's now available, here's the URL, here's the call number, and they're really encouraging folks to do it digitally or by phone first. So you'll get that. If you live in a rural address or have a post office box, you don't get mail delivered to your house, you will first get your census packet as a packet. It will have the form, it will have the postcard, it will have everything in it, and it will be like physically connected to your door. So keep in mind, the census is really about the housing units and who lives in them, not the person themselves. So that's why they're not delivered to a post office box. It's about identifying who lives in every housing unit. So if you don't get mail directly to your house, you will get a packet delivered to your door, and it will include the written form to fill out immediately. If you get it through the mail, they will try to encourage you to use the internet or the phone version and send a couple of postcards, and eventually, if you don't do it that way, you will get a form. So we are inviting people to really quickly respond. If you do it any of those ways right away, then you are self-responding, and that will show up on a moment-to-moment type mapping facility that we will be able to tell in every census tract how that's going. Then we can always shift gears and make a plan for where it's not going well. So then probably starting in May, there will be what we call non-response follow-up, or NARFU, it's a good census, US bureaucratic terminology, but that's when we will hire the vast amount of folks to go out and start doing the door knocking to follow up. So when somebody actually comes to the door and interviews you for the census, then you're not self-responding. And that, just that act of having somebody come to your door can sometimes make a difference in the responses themselves. Although the census is very much confidential, your information is not shared with any other government entity by law and by constitution. People do sometimes don't really understand that. So, for example, if you are a renter and there's 2 people on your lease, but there's really 4 people living there, if somebody is doing that interview with you, they're likely to say there's only 2 people because there's only supposed to be 2 people. So we really encourage people to be able to self-respond, and that means you're anonymously filling it out on your own. There's 9 questions, so it can't possibly take more than 10 minutes tops. So 10 minutes for 10 years. So that's the idea, is to really get people to fill it out themselves, or even with assistance from like a volunteer helping somebody get on the internet or whatever, doing different kinds of events to really help people respond themselves, so they're less likely to have that follow-up of an enumerator from the census.
Do they collect names of people living in the household like they did on some of the older censuses?
The census is relatively the same as it has been, but yes, initially, they do collect a name and phone number of the person filling out the form. So it's, the real questions of the census are age, gender, race, nationality, how many people live in the household, and what the relationship of those people in the household is to the person filling out the form. So that's all there is, but they do have the name and phone number attached in the very beginning, just in case, because I told you it's digital. So when they match up that address, like if somebody didn't really understand how to fill it out and maybe there's 2 families living there and both people filled it out, that will show up in our data set, and then they will say, is that some of those people the same or different, and try to, call back and just confer about the discrepancy at a particular address. But once that has all been verified, then basically all of the personally identifiable information is stripped, and your data is just that. It's just a big set of data that's used, and those 2 don't come back together for 72 years. So the idea of the census is to be just a set of data sets so that we understand what's happening in our communities for statistical purposes only.
Sure.
So then after 72 years, those records are merged back together, and that's where you get like Ancestry.com and
And
those
that
kind of
was my
things.
question. I know I do some genealogy work, and it's been very helpful to go back to a lot of those old records and see who was.
Yeah, that's something I had no idea about the census, but yeah, so that's when they kind of merge back together in a way that's usable by everyone.
Okay, perfect.
So the census will begin counting in March, early March of 2000, and there will be the ability, of course, to self-respond in all of those ways, roughly into July. But starting in May is when door knockers will come and start following up.
How are you dealing like with college students? Are they being counted on campus? Are they being counted at home? I mean, you want them counted, but not double counted.
Exactly. So college students, there is a sort of a different set of circumstances called group quarters, and it's not just college students, but that does consider dormitories, frat houses, nursing homes, all kinds of facilities where people actually reside there. College students in particular should be counted where they go to school. Because again, the idea of the census is to see where the infrastructure needs are. So because they live in the community where they go to school, at least 9 months out of the year, that's where they should be counted on the census. So that process for group quarters, particularly in university towns, starts earlier. And all universities have the option of basically, they can, in dormitories, for example, they can opt to do that administratively. But university students in dorms do have an actual mailing address that goes just to them. So it's been typical in my experience that universities prefer to have students take the census themselves because it is sort of a rite of passage civic duty type responsibility. So they will do that, but all of those other kinds of facilities, that administration of the facility has the option to have a census taker come and do it with everyone, or they can do it for them, essentially, if they have the records to be able to do that.
Thank you.
And then they will do that follow-up process. If there's a university town, they do that non-response follow-up. They bump it up about a month because typically college students will be moving out of their housing by May because they're done the first week. And that's when it would be starting normally. So like in Bozeman, that whole schedule would be ramped up because they want to make sure the off-campus housing folks get addressed before they leave the community for the summer.
Just out of curiosity, are military that are overseas?
The military bases are also that same type of program. They're done by a whole different sort of census group that goes into that, and then they're counted in according to, there's certain very specific parameters about how the military is done, but they're either, if they're away in foreign lands, then they're often counted in their home community, but if they're residing on a base, then they're counted within the base. But that's done administratively, separate from our community census.
So how do you deal with people that have more than one residence? Where, like you said, if you don't get a response, you're gonna get a package on your door, and that people are only there
For
for
the
few
summer
months,
months.
few weeks, whatever.
So the rule is that you are counted where you spend the most of your time. So if, for example, you're a snowbird and you go south for 3 months, you should be counted here where you spend 9 months. But if there isn't a really structured, like you maybe have 3 different homes, or you travel in a motorhome or whatever most of the year, then the guideline is that basically the census is a snapshot of what's happening on April 1st every 10 years. So if you don't have somewhere that you live most of the time, then you should take the census where you are located physically on April 1st.
So how do you check those? How do you know that a person doesn't do it 2 or 3 times, depending on where they're at? Maybe they're different states, so they're trying to help each state out.
Well, to be very direct about it, we are much more worried about an under response than an over response. That just doesn't really happen. So I think statistically, Montana in the 2010 census had like a 0.05 overcount. So, and that is most likely to do with college students, quite honestly. But the only way to check that again is by, there's an address. So, you know, then they can cross-reference that to lots of different kinds of administrative records and see those things. But I'm sure it does happen occasionally, but it's not typical.
Okay.
So it's maybe a little bit of a touchy subject, but how do, well, make sure I phrase this right. How do you distinguish legal residents in the United States so that the results don't get skewed?
The decennial census doesn't ask the question about citizenship. And that was a whole court process and all of that this time, but, and you addressed this a little earlier, talking about like what used to be on the forms. So until 20 years ago, there was basically, most people would get that 9-question form, and then 1 out of 10 or some statistic would get what they called a long form, which was like 60 questions, how many bathrooms, what's your income, that kind of thing. So now that is no longer part of the decennial census. That is done in an ongoing census survey called the American Community Survey, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And that is basically now a survey that happens to a percentage of population month in, month out. And that does have the citizenship question on it. So that is being tracked and monitored and followed all the time. But so it's a lot more ongoing than what's every 10 years. So that's something that they track in that American Community Survey, because it's much more relevant, because it's ongoing all the time, not just every 10 years. So that is how it's done, and that's kind of how it's always been done. So it's not that the question is not being asked, it's just not being asked on the decennial census, but it is in several other Census Bureau surveys that happen all the time.
You talked about setting up a community committee, but how would you do that?
So that's a strategy that's being used this time, really just connecting, and I can give you examples from all around the state of kind of how it's working, but we would really like to see your government sector being represented, your healthcare and like community nonprofits, seniors, some representation of those groups. Your education, K through 12 education, it can be a really critical part of really getting the word out there and giving them some tools to talk about it at school so that the kids can go home and make sure that their parents fill it out. And typically it has some representation from like your economic development community. They use a lot of those statistics, and they can have a lot of good connections. So basically, it can be as formal or informal as you would like, and it's about kind of brainstorming, and I have lots of resources and can share what other communities are doing, and taking advantage of other events that you would be hosting anyway. For example, the Christmas stroll, or some of those kind of things, just setting up an informational booth, or your newsletters, your websites, just really using information that we already have on hand and making sure that all of your community leaders, especially at this point, know that it's coming and why it's important. And then as we move closer towards March, we have to find ways to motivate people. If they're not inclined to just pick it up and do it, what can we do? I mean, can we have events or set up a Wi-Fi hotspot at your senior center and have people come and help fill it out? So really those kind of low or no cost activities to really get the word out, moving into actually motivating people to do it. We have about 60 complete count committees formed up in communities of all sizes across the state. And you know, everybody has their sort of events that are really well known, and it can be a really easy thing to put something into an event that's already existing. Really utilize your networks. I mean, if we make it really easy for you, put stuff out there on your website, push out emails that are, say, census is hiring, because when those folks do come to the doors, we want it to be your friends and neighbors. We want it really goes so much better if the people talking about the census to you are your friends and neighbors. They're the trusted voices in your community that can talk about why this is important to them. I mean, most of your senior centers, they understand that like a big bulk of the money that they get for senior programs comes from federal funding in some way. So it is just critical that people kind of have that understanding and talk to their friends and neighbors about why it's important to fill out the form. So that's much better to have your neighbor tell you to do it, or ask you to do it, or help you do it, than for somebody that's coming from, I'm here from the government. Please listen, I'm here to help you. So that's what really the name of the Complete Count Committee is really all about, is trying to facilitate you talking to each other in your own networks and areas of expertise to talk about why this is important and help make plans to motivate people to do it.
So will you have like employees in the county to do that, or do you have employees around the state doing that, or?
We have employees around the state, myself, and there's others that do the same job as I do. And then this is my colleague Cassidy over here, she's with the state, and they have a staff of about 8. And we don't actually run those committees for you, but we help facilitate the setup and give you, resources, like we can print things for you, we can give you everything you need to link up to our website, send you weekly updates, and we can send it to the whole committee. In some cases, there is somebody from the city or county that kind of runs the committee, and I give them the information, they distribute it. In some cases, I do the weekly updates to everyone, sit in on phone calls when you do have a meeting, and help find volunteers to maybe do an event. So kind of connect you to other resources and groups that can do events and printing copies of things or brochures or giveaways, that kind of thing. We really facilitate helping you do that. And coming to meetings and sharing best practices from other communities that are, similar in makeup to this one. So yeah, we have a lot of resources to help facilitate doing that. Largely, we want it to be, I can tell you what kinds of organizations are participating, like in Park County or whatever, that might be good ideas of who should be involved. And again, it's not like a weekly thing, it's just identifying, wow, we could put a message on. One thing that a lot of folks in rural counties have snowbirds. So one thing some folks are doing are putting it on tax bills, like the sense, so just looking at different resources that you already have and seeing how to incorporate that message.
When does it need to be completed by, again? The completion date?
Of the Complete Count Committee?
Yeah, or no, of the census. When's
Oh, it will wind up in July.
July.
Start in March and wind up in July.
Okay.
And then those numbers are mandated to be delivered to the president by the end of the calendar year. And then they use those, of course, the next 6 months for redistricting after that. So they do come back after the fact of the census and do basically a quality control. So right now, we know that we were overcounted by a minuscule percentage in 2010, but you don't find that out until the 2 years following the census, when they basically recreate it statistically and find out how you did. But the numbers stay the same from regardless of if you missed people or overcounted people, you live with that first count you get, even if they find out. So in 2000, Montana was undercounted by over 14,000 people. So they went back and found that out after the fact, but that didn't change the outcome. So Montana ended up losing out to another state of upwards of $400 million over that 10-year period. So even if they find out there was an undercount or overcount, that doesn't change the numbers that you got in the first place.
Okay. I don't know if you know the answer to this question. So typically, after they compile the data, when does it start to take effect as far as we would find out if we do pick up another congressional seat, or how does Congress determine, its aid? based on that information?
Well, as, in terms of the funding portion, that happens pretty much immediately.
Pretty quickly?
Yeah,
Okay,
but in terms of the congressional seats and stuff, that's another 6-month process after the numbers are delivered to do
Okay.
all of that apportionment. And I just learned, for example, in the last census, Utah lost a congressional seat. They were, by all practical purposes, people thought they were going to get one, and they ended up missing it by less than 1,000 people. So they missed 1,000 people taking the census and lost that seat by even less than that. So that's why we don't necessarily make predictions from the Census Bureau side of that, but it's really critical, and it can be that close. And now that technology is so much better, we can even see that on a digital map as we go along. So that's going to be a big deal, and it can go lots faster now because of all of the digital capacity.
So how is that congressional seat allotted? Is that strictly by the, you have to have a minimal number of people to pick up a seat, or are you in competition with other areas to
You're
pick
in
up that seat?
competition with every other district, so it depends on the growth rate per the growth rate and the population size all at the same time. So, you want every congressional seat to be very close to the exact same number of people represented. So we're in competition with every other state based on how fast we're growing compared to how fast everybody else is growing. And there's a pretty interesting video that's sort of like a Schoolhouse Rock type video that shows how they weigh all of that together. It's kind of interesting, but a pretty complicated formula. But yes, we are absolutely in competition with every other state. Does anybody else have questions?
no? I guess I would just like to encourage our residents to participate in the upcoming census. I think it's important. And
Is there anything you would like me to do to follow up with you or any other partners throughout Townsend that might be good to have in the know?
Real quick question, have you give somewhat of a similar presentation to the city council of Townsend?
Not yet, no.
But it is on the agenda. Thank you.
are you going to meet with the school officials? Are you planning to meet with those?
I haven't yet.
Okay, I was just kind of curious.
And typically, that's kind of, we start with county commissioners or mayors, depending on the county, but this committee is your committee. I will help you any way I can, but I don't tell you who should be on it. I can recommend different offices or types of organizations that are good participants, but really, I'm giving you the opportunity to say yes or no, I want to do this, and I can help you gather a good crew. But it is your committee, and I'm happy to go educate whoever you want me to in any capacity, but the Complete Count Committee itself is your committee, and I can help and guide and do some extra meetings to make sure everybody's up to speed to get started. But it's up to you who you want to be on it. I'm happy to recommend and meet with them, but it's up to you if you want a committee and who you want participating on it. And I did bring some packets that have a little more definition of what a complete count committee is, and so I can share that with you.
We have talked to Nicole, and she is still interested in doing this, so I'm assuming she would contact you, we'll have her contact you
Yeah,
to see
that
if
would
there's
be
anything
great.
else that you need to set up or anything with her.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I will leave my contact information and lots of good stuff for you. And we can follow up as soon as you're ready.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry.
Okay, so we can go to our 11 o'clock, Al Christopherson, Silos Master Plan RFP, present RFP examples to the commission. This is a request for proposal for a master plan for the Silos Recreation Area.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. First of all, I want to thank you for allowing us, the Citizens Action Group for the Silos Recreation Area, to participate with you and provide you some input on a RFP, master plan for the Silos Recreation Area. You have a draft RFP that we've sent you for our input, and we developed this by looking at several examples and going through some other files of proposed outlines, those kind of things. I think the most significant thing is that a request for proposal is much different than a bid package. Bid package has to have all the specs, all the legal requirements of putting it out, and you know, who says what to who doesn't, and all that kind of stuff. Request for proposal, basically, we outline what we want as a final product, and we ask the bidders to put together, as part of the package, a statement of work that outlines how they will propose to do the work and give us that final product. In this case, the master plan for the Silos Recreation Area. So it's different. And I know that the revelation of a couple boxes of material from 2004, 2005, somewhere in there, when the Broadwater Bay project was funded and being developed. In those boxes is several documents, real thick. There's a solicitation to do that project, which has all the drawings, all the specs, all that stuff. Bidding, bonding, everything. That's at least as thick as this package. And that was put together by the BOR. The primary thing in those boxes is what's called project plans and specifications, Broadwater Bay Excavation and Coke Grant. I've scanned through the final document there, and it is not a draft master plan for the Silos Recreation Area. These are the plans and all the documents that go with building Broadwater Bay. So I have not, as of yet, seen a document or read anything in there that references a master plan. Now, I know that the base map that we all started to work with was done at the same time. There was a survey done of the campground where all the sites were put in, buildings, outhouses, all that kind of stuff. So we have that, and that's actually been the base map that we've worked from day one. So, I just give you that as a piece of background, because I know there's been a lot of discussion about all the boxes that have been found and stuff, and they have been, and that's great, but they are not a master plan, even in a draft form, that we have found yet, okay? And I don't see anybody from UR here, they were supposed to be here, but anyway. So the document that we've drafted is it is a draft for you to look at and think about. We do have at least one more example coming to us that has been conveyed to us that this is a good example to look at. And I have not received that yet, so in view of that, I understand this really is a draft and could change. But anyway, it starts out with a scope of what the project is, and we simply just say that this is a master planning document that we want out of it. And where it is, it's for the Silos Recreation Area, Canyon Ferry Reservoir, Broadwater County. And it's to cover a vision time of 20 to 30 years. Some people may think that's a long time, but I suspect in this area it may be at least half that long before we get a lot of work done out there. But on the other hand, if we get lucky and hit the gong just right, it could be going in a year or two, and we could be done in 4 or 5 years. Some background information we put in about the campground itself, and that can be polished up. We know that we need some dates on some documents, things, and make sure that stuff's right. We do talk about the future development must be identified, included as part of the master plan. That's been the thing all the time. The Bureau has said, you know, before we're gonna do anything out there, we have to have it included in the master plan. So we're looking at a horizon out there for the master plan. We also talk about the fact that it's a very heavily used recreation site. It's ranked about 3rd in the state of Montana, Canyon Ferry Reservoir, and the Silos is probably the heaviest used recreation site on the reservoir. And there's a lot of survey data that's, I think, backing us up. We've got stuff coming from the aquatic insect disease folks that have their monitoring stations all around, and we're gonna get our hands on that information. We list reference documents, and that would be the Canyon Ferry Management Plan done by the Bureau, the partnership agreement that you all have with the POR, and a framework plan that was done as the initial part of this whole thing a year and a half ago, the framework document, and then the work that the Montana State University Landscape Design class did. And while those are all parts and pieces, we want any contractor that's looking at this to at least have the same base level of information to work from. They can go search out more if they want, but they all need to have the same information from us that says, look at this, kind of like this stuff up here. Any other documents that come up, we would have to list them in the RFP so that they have equal access to those levels of information. Then we go on, there's a tasks section. The first task we talk about is a development of the statement of work. This is where the contractor basically puts all their stuff together. They say, we have to write up a background, we do our background research, purpose and need of the project, existing facilities and the conditions, foreseeable facilities and users, design, all of those, were about 11 things. The last one being the last three. Develop cost estimates, those are by the alternatives they put together. Public and agency involvement in the master plan document itself. Schedule of work, how they're gonna do follow through with their statement of work, how they're gonna do all that. The assumptions that they use in developing the statement of work for the master plan. I think that's important, because if they make assumptions, how they put their proposal together, we need to understand those. And then a budget of the proposed tasks, which is their budget for this project. So there's two budget things. One is a budget or a financial economic evaluation of all of the alternatives and what goes into each one of those. And then the budget for doing this contract. So just make sure we keep them separate. We ask them to establish their Design performance standards, we look at those. If they aren't what we want, we can negotiate those. That's the nice thing about this, is when they give us their stuff, we can negotiate back with them. One of the things is reports. This has $32,000 of trust board money in it, and one of our requirements as a trust board is monthly progress report of projects. So we put that in here, that there has to be a monthly progress report, comes to you guys as the commission, because you're the contractors. But the trust board, all of the funding entities, I think, would be entities that should get a copy of that report, so. And we'll see how that. Deliverables are, could be several things. It could be public meetings, when they hold those. Certainly the last thing is the master plan. They're gonna have to show how they work in concert with the county and with the BOR on this, so that they are meeting the expectations of not only the county, but the BOR, because this is a master plan for the BOR property that you guys have the agreement to manage. So, it'll be important, that the BOR is part of this. BOR has already identified a person that'll be their technical representative. That'd be Dan Gallagher, I believe. And so he will be part of basically any meetings, any discussions, that kind of stuff going on with that. Then, we want to see what the qualifications of the contractor is. So we're asking that they list their experience with recreation site master planning, when, where, what, and for whom. And we had a lot of discussion within our group getting to that one. We want to know the qualifications of whoever's proposing this, whether they've got experience dealing with water-based recreation, land-based large federal recreation sites like this is. And we want to know what the qualifications and experience of their staff that are being assigned to work on this proposal. And then we want some references for them. So, we also want to make it sure that we're going to be evaluating their proposals, and that evaluation will be based on their statement of work, their overall proposal detail, which is the whole package, knowledge of the Silos Recreation Area, and experience and qualifications of the consultant and the staff and their references. So there are about 5 or 6 things there that we would suggest to be used to evaluate the proposals coming from contractors, consultants. Now, undoubtedly there's some detail here that needs to be filled in and that kind of thing, and we'd be glad to continue to work as we get another example or two and work with you on what your vision is for this one. We've had some discussion, and I think you guys are thinking about it, you know, who would be administering this for you guys, for the county. We asked the BOR if their technical proposal person would be able to be your contract administrator. And that gate is somewhat open. We asked specifically if Dan could be your contract administrator. I think they have some sideboards they have to put on it about what he is as the technical advisor from the agency can do specifically for you guys. And so I think you'd have to have some discussion with them about that. But I think somebody like Dan would make a good contract administrator if that's something that you guys can work out in the details with. One of the primary things I think you would have left to do would be to make sure we get all the referenced material, all the stuff that we have, onto a spot on your county website, so that when this goes out, anybody that's interested can go to that site and find all the referenced documents and material that keeps it on an even platform for anybody. So, with that, questions?
I have a question. The Silos Master Plan, is it footprinted strictly on BOR ground?
Yes.
It is.
It's from the, if you're familiar with it, it's the north fence line on the north day use area. So I think they're section lines to the south end down there.
The north end being north of the airstrip?
No, north end of the day use area is about.
Approximately midway of there.
Yeah. If you go down there, there's a fence line comes off the airstrip fence, that's the boundary. And on the south end, it's where the BLM section comes down closer to the lake from the subdivision out there. And those are the two brackets for
So
the study area.
approximately a mile and a quarter.
Probably about that, yeah.
So
So we have, part of the process of this thing is to try and show, basically connections from the silos, recreation area. So at least acknowledge that there are avenues to get to the dikes on the south end out there. And that has connections clear to the river, it has connections to the highway and clear into town. That's an important thing, I think, that plan has to include. Going north, the whole issue about the hike bike path, it's not just the path, it's the parking area, how you set all that up. And should that be part of looking at the master plan for the Silos Recreation Area? Should there be a parking area down there and then connect wherever that thing goes, I don't know.
So the path isn't a part of this master plan at this point?
Nope.
It's something that the board, trust board is considering strictly separately, there's no connection to the BOR at this point?
Not for the master plan. I mean, the master plan only deals with that, but we want it to acknowledge that it feeds other things. It is close to the Silos County land up there. You know, should there be a walkway or pathway that goes up that way? How do we connect to the highway for all the trails that go down the highway and into town and that kind of thing? So it's, the thing is, hopefully it will look at those opportunities or those issues, but the decision space is the Silos Recreation Area.
I was just thinking it would be wise if there's been talk of potentially running that pedestrian trail along the BOR boundaries. And there it looks like it'd be wise to include that in your master plan if that's something that you are gonna do rather than run it across.
I think
private
that's,
lands.
that would be public comment that would be welcome when this contractor starts putting this thing together. Just exactly that, which way or how should it be done? And how they address it and the path itself, I think, is a different issue. That's a BOR specific thing that they're gonna have to deal with, doing their assessment on that. If it's on BOR land. If it's not on BOR land, it's somebody else's job. But I think the master plan is just going to acknowledge avenues of ingress and egress to the recreation area.
Thank you.
So if the county was to get out of their contract with the BOR on the campground, that has a 2-year clause on it. How would the BOR be tied to this master plan? I mean, if we go through the time and money to develop this master plan, and then the county says we no longer wanna be involved with this lease for this facility, is there any way that we can tie the BOR to follow that master plan, with the guidelines that you have in here?
Well, this is my thought, just standing here responding, is that I think the master plan should have an approval page that you guys sign and that water signs. Cannot let them out of this deal. That's me. But it's BOR property. They've got to agree to what the plan is, and I think it's a mutual sign page. You guys sign it, and they gotta sign it. So then there's no exit from what's in that plan. So I think that helps. Now, how you do that, I think that's the reason there's a technical advisor from the BOR. And I've had some discussion with them about that, and that they need to be as much on the approval page as you guys. And so I think that's part of the deal is, and it's probably something we need to write in here, thinking about it, is that a contractor that's looking at putting a proposal together here has to understand what the requirements for the BOR are to do a master plan. And that if we're saying this is a mutually approved document, you guys are the contractor, but you got half of their money. So they've gotta be on the page with you. And I think that sets it up then.
Can I ask you a question? Is the master plan shown somewhere where you can go look at it currently?
There is no master plan.
Oh,
That's why we're doing this.
Yeah,
I thought something had been approved though, already.
No. We've looked back historically, that's why the discussion about these missing documents and all that stuff, we can't, at least so far, have not found anything that says a master plan was done back in 2004, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there. The documents that we have now are all construction documents for Broadwater Bay. So this is the plan. It's much bigger to look way down the road, long-term horizon, 20, 30 years. And
essentially vetting many federal grants, et cetera, to facilities such as the Silos Recreation Area cannot come through without a master plan.
So even the
Gotta
Silos
get this
master
up
plan
front.
is not been established?
no, that's what this contract
That's what this
is doing.
contract is for, is to establish a master plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Bob's exactly right. Entities that we've talked to as we've tried to get some funding together to get the master plan done, most entities will tell you they are not interested in doing planning work. I understand that. But come back to us and talk to us when you got the master plan done, because we're all ready to help you with implementation. And so I think, the message there is we're gonna have a lot of opportunity to partner up, find grant funds, find partners to do work, once we get the master plan done. Because then the BOR's already said, yes, we like the way this works. In my opinion, they've signed off on it at that point. So anything within that plan then is go get it, and we can start looking for partners to help do certain aspects. Some of it is big stuff. I mean, you start rebuilding camp pads and roads and water systems and power lines and all that. That's money that's gonna have to come through the system to pay for that. But a lot of stuff like gazebos and planting trees and all those kind of things that are amenities to a big facility are things that I think the county would be successful at going and getting grant money. Or, the BOR is gonna have to come back and do it. Without master plan, we can do it.
Do you have something, Virgil?
Yeah, one of the things on the master plan, I've been working with this for years, the BOR doesn't have anything that they can go ahead with at the moment to put on their construction budgets. And those are the people that make the requests through the Department of the Interior for development costs. So until you get some good paperwork, a good plan, and everybody's in agreement, it's very difficult for those people to go to Congress and ask for money without a good plan that everybody's in agreement on. And, you know, the quicker you can get this done and things in what I call fluid, then those folks